Hey, what is going on, you Dull Dust Talks? So, a little while ago, I created a little bit of a hubbub around pile shuffling in the Pokemon TCG community. The main point I was trying to get across is that it's just not a form of randomization. It shouldn't be treated as such. I was getting back and forth with people on Twitter and the YouTube comments and all that fun stuff. But Steffen Eriksen reached out to me and asked if we could get in a call together and just kind of talk about randomness shuffling in the Pokemon TCG to kind of give me a clearer picture on what I was trying to convey to the people out there. And I was like, sure, cool, that's great, let's do that. But what if we turn it into like an interview style video where maybe I don't just learn something from you, but maybe everyone else in the Pokemon TCG community can learn something as well. And that's what this video is about. Now, Steffen Eriksen is a Pokemon TCG player, has been playing, I don't actually know when they started playing. They've been playing longer than I've been playing the game, and I started playing in 2010. So longer than I've been playing. They judged this last season, so they're a player, they're a judge, but on top of all that, they teach stats. So very knowledgeable about numbers. And this video is just me talking to them and discussing random and shuffling in the Pokemon TCG. It's the first time I've ever done a video like this, so if you enjoy it, be sure to give it a like. And in the comment section, let me know if there's anything you felt like I could have done better in this kind of style of video, or if there's a topic you'd like me to find someone who's a little bit better of an expert on than me that relates to the Pokemon TCG in some way, because I would definitely love to do more videos like this in the future. I think the topics that apply heavily to the Pokemon TCG are a little bit limited, but if you have any ideas, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll go out of my way to try and find someone who I can talk to who has a better idea of those things and maybe can convey the information to you better than I can. And with that said, this is my discussion with Steffen Eriksen on random and shuffling in the Pokemon TCG. Hey, what is going on, everyone? I am joined here today with Steffen Eriksen, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about random RNG and kind of how it relates to Pokemon a little bit. Steffen is a player, a judge, and also an associate professor in finance, and does teaching around statistics as well. And unless there's anything else you think the people should know about you, Steffen, you recently did a presentation on basically shuffling, right? And I thought we could start there and have you kind of talk to us about what that was like and what you were kind of teaching in that.
Oh, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me here. And well, let's just get straight to it. So not too long ago, I gave a professor seminar on the topic of randomization, because next to all my fun teaching gigs at university, I also teach a course on combinatorics for the Honors College, which is, well, also an opportunity for me to teach about randomization in card games, and which is a gateway to just talk about Pokemon for like a full lecture, which I don't mind at all, of course. So in this particular course that I also gave here, or this presentation for the professor seminar, we talked about randomization and what does it actually mean. And when we talk about randomization in the world of Pokemon TCG, of course, we talk about shuffling most of all, right? So I introduced what is meant by randomization. So we discussed briefly, well, what is actually the definition of random in this sense? Then we moved into what type of shuffles are out there, and we have all seen a lot of different types of shuffles, both good and less good ones. And of course, based on a selection of those shuffles we deem, say, they're okay to use, then we looked at the optimal number of shuffles, because there's a lot of things you need to keep track on, like not only how efficient is a shuffle, but how long does it take? And how many times do I actually sit there and shuffle before I got a sufficiently randomized deck? So that's what I presented about Azul.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Good start. All right, so let's start with that then, with what is random, specifically related, of course, to the Pokemon TCG. Of course, the term that we work with in the Pokemon TCG is sufficiently random, right? Yeah. Because it's hard or if not like impossible, especially in the Pokemon TCG, to ever achieve something that would be quote unquote true random, right? Which is a term that I feel like some people sometimes use without actually knowing what it means. So sufficiently random is what we're going to be working with as far as the term goes today. So what does that mean in the Pokemon TCG? We can take an example of, like, you start the game, you both sit down to cut your opponent's deck, and your opponent cut your deck, or shuffle it or tap it, whatever it might be. Your deck has to be sufficiently random before you present it to your opponent. So what would that look like, and why does it look like what it is?
Okay. It's a really good starting point, so let's just jump straight in. Actually, I like to use the term sufficiently random, and I guess you also like to do that term. It's also a fine term to use. But fun fact, if you actually look up under, is it section 5.7, shuffling and deck randomization, they got a nice section on that in the rule book. Part of judging is that you should know sort of where all the rules are, but 5.7, I believe, But there they talk about that each player's deck is expected to be fully randomized. They use the term fully randomized, funny enough, even though it's because if you write sufficiently random here, I think it opens up some gateways to how you interpret that. But also, again, fully randomized, also up to interpretation. But let's get into the topic here. What does it mean that a deck of cards, so, well, our 60 cards when we sit down and start a game, what does it mean is sufficiently random? Well, ultimately speaking, we wish that it's uniformly distributed. That means that the probability I draw whichever card from my deck or whichever placement a card has in my deck is the same. That means if I play 1N, let's update that to Iono. If I play 1 Iono in my deck, the probability that it is on the bottom, somewhere in the middle, on the top should be exactly the same after I shuffle, because then it's uniformly distributed. That's what we expect our deck to be when you sit down and play. Anything less than that, depending on how much less than that, of course, because in fact, if you want to reach true randomization or say really uniformly distributed, you're going to shuffle for quite a while. So we always end at what is sufficient. And of course, I can shuffle a few times, and then some people that will be enough, and others you need a little more. But in general, we go for sufficient, which simply just means that we cannot guess where anything is anymore. If I just do 1-2 shuffles and I still have an idea where my Ono is in the top or the bottom, that's no good. But if I really sufficiently shuffle for quite a few times, we're going to talk about those shuffles a little later, I guess, Azul, then I would have no guess where it is. And that's where we're reaching the point where this is fine, because you don't want to be able to guess where it is. That's the most, to say, easy to understand version of this. Yeah.
Okay, so we don't want to be able to guess where a card possibly is. And of course, I would say the main form of shuffling that people use is probably the mash shuffle. Like, I feel like, Riffle is probably the second one. I think that's pretty much it, right? So mash and Riffle.
Those are like the two, say, really, really standout ones that people tend to talk a lot about. But of course, truth is, people, they mix and mash. Yep. Okay, that was a good term of words here, but people, they mix and mash, and that's exactly what they do. So when you shuffle, and people, they like, say, Riffle shuffle, you don't see them only Riffle shuffle, not always. Yeah. They always, maybe they finish up with a couple of overhands or a couple of Hindu shuffles, or they just make a cut or whatever, right? Truth is, people, they always mix, and that's perfectly fine. We're not here to tell them you can only use this one shuffle and then one shuffle to the end. Everybody has their own personal touch to it. Even when I shuffle, I riffle a few times, I mash a few times, and I give it a couple of overhands at the end, because that just feels like a nice finishing touch. Although those overhands, technically speaking, at the end doesn't really do much, but it just makes you feel nice when you hand over your deck. and that's also perfectly fine. But the point is, you still have to be in a timely manner. Yeah. Because now I'm coming back to that 5.7 again, because another point is reasonable amount of time. They also mentioned that somewhere, which means you cannot sit there for a full minute, and just riffle. Yeah. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Can't take forever to shuffle. Okay, so what we're trying to do is have it, or ideally, we have one Iona in our deck, and we hand it over to our opponent to cut 60 card deck. We want it to have an equal chance of being in any of those 60 slots of where it could be amongst the other cards. So roughly, to present a deck that is sufficiently random to our opponent, how many times would we have to mash or riffle shuffle our deck to achieve that, or get close to it? Because it can never be perfect, right? You can't know for sure that the Iono has had enough opportunity to be in every single spot, or the equal opportunity. But what is enough riffle or mashes to get close enough where all 60 cards in the 60 card deck have had a reasonable amount of movement throughout the deck to end up in a slot, one of those 60 slots where they could be, where we can no longer reasonably predict where they are?
You said a very dangerous thing here, so we used a very dangerous word. You mentioned the word movement.
Movement.
Yeah, and let's park that one for a moment, because we're going to probably come back to that one in terms of another type of shuffle, quotation mark. Because just because a card is moving around does not mean that it becomes random. But okay, so how many shuffles should I need in the beginning of the game? We're of course assuming we set up the game. We have 60 cards in our deck. No 63, no 59, 60. That's what we are set up to game for the game. And the second assumption we're also kind of doing here in terms of how many shuffles is that There's also one I like to use in my presentation. If we do a proper mass shuffle, like a really good mass shuffle, it can mirror the Riffle shuffle very well. That's the whole idea. That's the whole point. If you make a good mash, you can kind of say it's a good proxy Riffle, which means that the mathematical deviations that's been made in the field of, say, Riffle shuffles, we can just carry that over to mass shuffle. That's kind of what we can assume here. Of course, mass shuffle have its own caveats, but we just assume for the moment that it proxies Riffle very, very well, which done correctly it does. And then if you look at internet, you look up the formulas or whatnot, you hear this 7 pop up the whole time. And truth to the point is, 7 is a good number, because how do they figure this out? This is where the so-called variation distance, I'll try not to use too many mathy words or statistic terms here, but it basically where it takes a sharp drop towards the uniform distribution, towards random. That's where this transition becomes sharp, they call it. And that happens at 7. But if you use the formula, and if you find the formula out there and actually use it, it doesn't give you 7 for 60 cards. Actually, I don't remember exactly what it gives right now. I have to look it up, but I know for 52 cards, that one I just have imprint in my mind gives 8.55. And I can certainly tell you, if you have a larger deck, you needed more shuffles. So we need that if you do the calculation actually for like this, you get higher than 8.55. In any case, that's not 7. But here, you kind of come to the point that what is reasonable amount of time and what is kind of like, enough in that sense. So strictly speaking, 7 is not the correct answer here, because you actually need more following their own formula. But 7 is typically seen as a good, say, rule of thumb, good, and it should be fine. This is where after 7 good mash or good riffles or a combination of both, that Iono, it could be anywhere. That's basically the point, right? So I think that's the short way of saying this.
Okay.
Short in my book, of course, but.
Oh man, where do I want to go from there? Hang on, let me gather myself here for just 1 second.
It's late, I know. It's late for you, early for me.
Okay, so 7. So basically, after 7, every mash or riffle shuffle you did do after 7 would further the randomness of the deck, but up until the point where there's the diminishing returns are so high to achieve the difference between 6 to 7 riffles to get to like the amount of randomness increase from 6 to 7. You'd have to do, how many roughly would you think you'd have to do to get to like the equal terms of distribution?
I don't know the exact number there, but I get what you're pointing at here. Like it's kind of like that utility theory also. Again, like, you go from 0 to 1, you're very happy, but if you go from 10 to 11, you're still happier, but that increase is not that much anymore.
Yeah.
There's this decreasing returns to scale in economics they like to use here, I believe.
Yeah.
And of course, when you go from 6 to 7, there's still enough decrease, but then when you go from, say, again, 10 to 11, yes, there is an increase in terms of randomness. Surely you do one more good shuffle, you get closer to uniform, but the gain you get there is not high enough. That's kind of the point here, right? It diminishes so much that, yes, if you shuffle one more time, it does technically help, because, yes, you move towards randomness, or our proxy for randomness, which is the uniform distribution in this case, but it doesn't gain you a lot, no. And there's a note I forgot to mention, which I think is very important, because I talked about, like, we could not guess what Iono is. And then I mentioned this fancy term, total variation distance. There's actually, the reason I mentioned the guessing first was because there's another way to, say, measure the distance to randomness that I think people would actually like to know. If I take a deck of cards, let's just use the standard 52 cards, right? And I ask you, okay, I flip the first card, I don't show you, but you guess what it is, right? And then you say it's the spade of 2 of spades, right? And I show you, nope, that was 3 of spades. And then I put the card on the table, so you see which card is gone. And I do the next one, and I ask you again the same question, and you keep guessing. We keep proceeding with this, right? And the idea is that if you do this and the deck is sufficiently random, on average it comes out of 4.50 something, 4.5 correct guesses roughly. And that's the benchmark, right? So if you then supposedly shuffle correctly, that's the amount of guesses we should land correctly if you just would flip and guess the whole time. So that's also a way to measure it. So, and of course, this is done with, for people who love their simulations out there. I know a few of you. And of course, this is under hundreds of thousands of simulations. You land at this number because, of course, we have outliers. Yeah. But the idea is then if I just shuffle a few, suppose I just shuffle twice only, then the amount of guesses I get is actually significantly higher. And that's a problem because then we're getting further away from random. That's a more easier way to understand how they would measure the randomness of something, a deck of cards. Because you as well as I know that if you have a deck of 52 cards or 60 like in Pokemon, the amount of permutations or different ways the deck can be ordered, it's very, very, very big. Yeah. They already say that for a normal deck of cards, it's more than the particles in the known universe. And that's for 52 cards. So imagine we do this for 60. Just, it's 60 factorial. So that exclamation point people will see in mathematics sometimes. It's I cannot stress how large that number is. That's the amount of possible ways your deck can be ordered. So every time you draw a new hand in Pokemon, it's most likely the first time you ever see it. And yes, you can play multiple copies of something, and that of course changes something because this assumes individual pieces, like you're playing Singleton, or I have my GLC deck here, you're playing GLC, you're Singleton. But there's some things going, but it's very, very likely that you never, ever draw the same hand twice.
As long as you...
And that's also something...
Sufficiently randomized, right? As long as you sufficiently
randomize. Exactly. It doesn't mean it cannot happen, but the likelihood that this happens, we're out talking about, the winning the Powerball or struck by lightning, these kind of, we're really out there. We're out there. Yeah. We just think about it. It's kind of amazing, like how unlikely these things are. This deserves a little coffee in my end for sure.
All right. So I think the next two things I wanted to talk about were, one is going to be a little bit more of a hot topic. The first one I wanted to talk about, though, because I see this one come up a lot when people talk about achieving randomness or what they do to achieve randomness. Yeah. So based on everything we've talked about so far, it would... this is what I've kind of believed in the past. It would seem to me that doing different methods of shuffling wouldn't lead to a more random deck. So if you pile shuffled and then you riffle shuffled 3 times and then mash 2 times and then riffle shuffled 3 times, or if you just mash shuffled 8 times, would it be about equal in terms of sufficiently random?
It's a very interesting question first, because I don't believe there's official research on mixing shuffles. I haven't found it yet. If somebody, of course, finds it, please link it in the video below and all that kind of stuff, because I would like to know this, because we all learn. But the point is, I believe, we talked about how mash can proxy riffle, so it doesn't matter which ones you use, and you can also mix them, I would say, and that should come by extension. But in any case, it shouldn't, in theory, not do something, I believe. I say in theory, but that's my own belief I'm going on right now here. It wouldn't do much, no.
Okay, so I guess working off that a little bit then, actually, I'm curious, like, do we ever take human error into account, specifically maybe with mash shuffles? Would it be safer, let's say if we put out the number 7 as like a go-to number, or even we could even say the 8 number, we said it was like 8.5. So we could even go up to
8.5. Yeah.
So we could even say 9. So we could even take 9 as a number. So let's say we do 9 riffles is considered sufficiently random. If we do mashes, which are supposed to mimic riffles, but are probably a little bit harder to do a good mash compared to a good riffle, should we ever take human error into account and be like, well, maybe you should do 11 mash shuffles? Or is it so tedious at that point that, 7 to 9 with either of them doesn't really matter?
Actually, there's one point that I will speak in favor here of just doing more mash compared to riffle, and that's because at least with sleeves on, now I'm assuming everybody is using sleeves on their cards here, of course. I think that's a fair assumption. It's faster to do a mash in general.
You can probably do like 3 mashes per riffle.
Exactly. Although, I must admit, I've seen some players as judges when I walk around. There's some people that can riffle like a machine. You also know some of these people. I can mention some names here, but let's keep that away, because that just whatever. But the point is, there's people out there who can riffle like a machine, which is amazing to watch. I found myself as a judge just standing there at the table, just watch a bit, because that was actually amazing to see. It looks like just a machine, like... But in general, mashes are quicker, which means that when we talk about the time aspect of it, you could think, sorry about that. You could think about it like this. I could save some time overall and just only mash and only stick with the seven mash. Or give it a few extra because mash has some issues we talked about. One of them people keep coming back at, and Pokemon actually released some really cool videos on that. So just 2 times 1 minute videos on what are good shuffling techniques, and more importantly, what are some bad habits you should get rid of. And there they showed a mash shuffle, because people learn to mash because mash is quite easy.
Yeah.
And one of the issues there is, for instance, that they forget to move the top card. Like you mash and you kind of forget that little clump up at the end. And then you didn't randomize the top portion of the deck, and, well, let's be fair, that can seem pretty shady if you don't move your top card. But the other thing is also fanning. You heard about that before, I believe. Like when you mash, there's this tendency that the deck will spread out because you want to, like, you know, get the cards really well in between easily. And then if you do it, like, say, in the right way, you can actually see kind of what's going on a little bit. But I must also admit, your eyes need to be very good for this and very fast. Like, I don't know about you, but my vision is not 20/20 vision. I can tell you that. So, but the point is, you don't want to get to any situation where there becomes any doubt at all. They don't want to sit there and question, how well does this guy actually look? Like, can he see it? That's not what you want to do. But so you need to keep these in mind when you actually mash. So you need to practice that a lot. But we also believe in our fellow player that by far the vast majority of everybody out there, they're shuffling with mash with good intentions, right? They're not aiming to cheat against you or anything like that. So if they don't do it, say, the most proper way, well, all you have to do is just say, maybe you should do this, or you're always welcome to shuffle your opponent's deck. Remember that. Always welcome to shuffle their deck. But back on the topic, yes, you can do a few more. That's fine. Time-wise, you should equal to the same as if you just riffled. Actually, it may even still be faster. But again, assuming it's done correctly, more should be fine. But human error is a thing, but I wouldn't factor that in too much. Judge's life is already hard enough as it is.
Okay, yeah, I've actually started. I've started counting. I've started doing more mashing than riffling because it is faster, and I definitely do. Yeah. And I've actually started counting how many mashes I do. So like, I try and do before a match starts or in between games, I'll do like 14, and then my first, and then from there I usually do 7, and then even like down towards 5 as the game progresses. They have less cards in your deck, and I've noticed
excellent point you're making there, by the way. Excellent point, Azul.
And I've noticed it's like by the time my opponents picked up their cards to go into game 2, I've already done like 14 matches. So like I've gotten really good about being fast, and I've never really counted it before, so I didn't really know how much I was shuffling. Because when a lot of people pick up their cards, they start to shuffle them together as they pick them up. They don't just pick them all up, stack it up, and start shuffling. Which is actually something I want to talk about. Which is another thing I want to mention or talk about real fast. I assume for a deck to be sufficiently random, and for the idea is the cards in the deck need to have an opportunity to be in or equal opportunity to be in each spot of the deck. Theoretically, you do need all 60 cards together. You couldn't like split your deck in half and shuffle each half 10 times and then put those 2 halves together and then only shuffle them twice, and that would be sufficiently random at that point, I would assume.
I actually posed this question in my, say, at work or in a math community or whatnot, because it's actually quite interesting. Because the question I posed is very related to this. So the question I particularly posed, suppose I shuffle 59 cards. I shuffle 7 times, and I find the last card in my deck box. Or like, shoot, I forgot one. But good, I managed to get it before the game starts. So I dump it in my deck, and I just give it 2 mash or 2 riffle, because I already did 7. Is that enough? And honestly, I don't think there's any work on this. But following, strictly speaking, you should start over. I would definitely say you should start over. But I think there should be, the question is there actually any discount here? And truth is, I don't know. I don't know if there's like in your example, you have 2 equal decks, so 30 each pile. They're perfectly random. Say you shuffled each of them like a lot of times. You squish them together and you do just 2. I'm not certain, but I would say, like on top of my head, I would be tilted just towards saying do it over. But again, if there are 2 completely random piles, you don't know which cards are in there to start with. That's also the very important thing.
Yeah.
Assuming you don't know which card are in each pile to start with, because it could be that one contains your discard pile or something, so you have an idea. Assuming you don't know, then I think you could get away with it. Just do 2 because then they are technically random. But if at any point you know which pile, and that typically happens after a game, you shuffle up your field, you have your deck, you just dump it there, and you discard pile, whatnot, And then suppose you would shuffle those 2 individually. No, then you should start over because you already know to start with what kind of cards are in each of these 2 piles. Then you have a problem.
Okay, makes sense.
But it's a really interesting one. I really need to give this one some more thought. A good question, Azul, because no, I hope to also get some pointers back on this because I got a lot of conflicting answers, I must say, because where every time you get to something new and you ask mathematicians if there's something they're very proud of, it's their opinion, right? So you get they get all kinds of things going on. But if I hear something or there's come something out of it, I definitely would be sharing with it because I think this is really good for the community as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn for a lot of people in the community, for sure. And I think the biggest thing is like, a lot of people are. It's very good. It's good to teach them why something is right or what something is, instead of just telling them, "You're wrong. This is right," so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the next one, which is the controversial topic I wanted to bring up, which is pile shuffling.
You mean pile counting, right?
Pile counting, of course.
Did I hear wrong? It's pile counting, right?
Pile counting. And it's actually funny because in the we don't have anything. Actually, this is like another thing that I thought was curious. I went to go look in other rule books for other card games for Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and in the Magic rule book it says they specifically say that pile counting is not a form of randomization. But they also don't give a prescription for what is a form of sufficiently random. So I didn't really like that. There's also nothing like that in the Pokemon rule book. And it wouldn't have to be like a hard rule you'd have to follow. Like if Pokemon said you have to mash 8 times. But I think an example would be good in any of these card game rule books. So there's nothing in Magic, which I was a little bit disappointed in because I thought they would have something. I didn't really expect anything in the Pokemon rule book, and I don't think there's ever been anything in the past in there as well. And there's nothing there currently.
No, I doubt. I can't think of any of at this moment.
Yeah.
But you did say something interesting that in Magic they literally say straight in. I did not look at the Magic rule book, so I'm going on what you're saying here. That they say that it's not a form of shuffling or sufficient random,
randomization.
Right?
Yeah.
There we go. One thing Pokemon did do, and I'm back to those videos they had. Because they actually show pile shuffling. And yes, they put quotation marks on their shuffling now. Because they also, and I actually found on my screen so I can read it out here, it's really cool. They say pile shuffling is good for counting your cards before a game begins, but is not, and this is in big letters, not considered a true shuffle. I think this is a big step from Pokemon going in and saying something in the lines of pile shuffling, ladies and gentlemen, not considered a randomization. So if I just sit there and pile shuffle or pile count, let's get the stigma of let's get it away from this because already start by counting, we already move away from considering it a shuffle, right? Mm-hmm. Because yes, when you sit up for the first game, did I pile count? Of course I did, because I want to be sure I have 60 cards, but you can also do it in different ways. And I know you made videos on this, but in any case, as long as we can count to 60 in a reasonable amount of time, it should be fine, I would assume. And one of the way that people like to is, pile counting. Why? Because even if you miscount, say, if you just end the right spot, you already have, it's double check kind of thing. Yeah. You need to end like down the corner. That's kind of what people like. And people like these mental safety nets. And that's also fine. We should respect it, and I still think that's also a fine idea because, let's face it, you sit there and chit-chat with the opponent, you just start piling or whatever. I forget what number I'm halfway, and I'm too old to start over and too old to remember all of it. So I'm like, okay, I pray halfway, I end down the corner, and I pray that was for 60, not for 66 or 54, So have I done that before? Yeah, surely, of course. But in any case, it should be for counting your deck to 60 at the start of the game. Very important. And then we come on something I need to mention here. That's you. If you're playing a best of 3, pretty please, anybody out there, don't do this between game 1 and 2 or game 2 and 3. Just do it for 60. The likelihood your card has disappeared, you know what? Don't even. You're just wasting time at that point. Just go down and do some proper shuffles. But that's my own plea. I don't know whether you're going to join on that chant, Azul, or you sit and pile count between game 1 and 2, or I'm sitting here and dissing you.
Yeah, generally I don't. Though actually, I did recently. Actually, I was at I it was Milwaukee. I don't know. It was Hartford. One of the regionals. There's so many of them. But
There's a lot of them.
me and my opponent were playing the exact same deck with the
Yeah.
exact same sleeves. So I was the one who was like, all right, we should probably count, make sure we both have 60 here, and then check our stadiums as well, because I think we were playing the same.
Did you win? Did you win game one by any chance, Azul?
No, I did lose game one.
Okay, so you're being nice about it.
Yes.
Here. Okay, yeah, I could see something. No, but I'm just saying this in general, right? Because what is the likelihood you're playing the same 60 or same sleeves or whatever? There's so many different sleeve colors out there. There's one for every day of the week, 10 times over. So.
Rarely happens for sure.
Rarely happens.
So,
but no, it's a thing.
What would be for the people who are out there who are believers in the pile counting, leading towards, which of course is kind of like anecdotal evidence on their part, leading towards them thinking that it leads them to drawing better? What is a way you could kind of break it down to help them understand why it doesn't actually affect the outcome of their games, and why it's not considered to randomize their deck?
Let me give an attempt. So, a fact about this, I teach this combinatorics course in Honors College, and for the exam, one of the questions I gave for one of the groups, because we had just a group exam, easy peasy, because Honors College lets you do whatever. Then one of the questions was, I presented the pile shuffle, and I simply just asked them, tell me, is this good or not good, and why? And I'm actually found my student solution here, because I think that was a good solution. I even think I posted on Twitter back then, because I think they actually hit it very, very well. They list just some pros and cons. So let's start there, and then we move over to why it actually is not. The pros about pile counting, because there are pros. They protect your cards. Like we know about, you don't bend your cards like a riffle or whatever. And it's an easy technique that's very beginner friendly. That's definitely something that is true for the pile counting, right? It doesn't get much easier. The cons that they list here is highly non-random. I get to that in a moment. And they also say underlying patterns of the deck make draws guessable. And now we come back to that thing about guessing I talked about, like if you can guess a card if I start flipping it. And the point is, if I just sit here, and no, guys, even if I do 7 piles, 8 piles, doesn't matter. All this kind of pile doesn't matter. It's all about the patterns that pops up. But let's just assume you do your standard 6 piles. Just the fact that the cards move around these piles, so we're back in this movement, doesn't mean it's random. Because the point is, if I just put all the cards out in 6 stacks, so there's 10 cards in each stack, and I just stack them up together, kind of know where in what area each things are. And then we go back in the discussion about declumping, or is it in Magical, was that mana weaving? They had a specific term for that. I believe that was it, right?
I think it's just that's literally what they call pile shuffling is called mana weaving. I saw that recently.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm not a Magic player, but I like some of the terms they come up with. They're a little ahead on us on those things. So it's cool to look there and see what they got, right? Pokemon does that sometimes. That's cool. We learn.
We're catching up.
We're getting there. But the point is that this here. And then some of the believers may say, yeah, but afterwards I do riffle and mash a few times and whatnot. But then you just kind of broke your own argument, right? Because why don't you just mash and riffle in the first place to protect your poor shuffling at first? Or poor counting, whatever it is, right? So the point is, when I just move stuff around, moving stuff around does not constitute randomization, because it's able to guess where cards are. You can identify a pattern. Cannot do a card trick here on the table, but my students were even so nice that they actually said, okay, look here, we have this card, and then they did the pile, and they could tell us exactly where it is, even after you do all kinds of, stuff afterwards, because you can follow it. And suppose at that point, I might as well just play one Battle VIP pass in my deck, because I know I get it under my hand when I start. That's kind of the problem you end at, right? And then you see, why the hell do people play one Battle VIP pass with no search option? No, okay, now I'm just making fun of stuff here, but people won't do that. But I'm saying that could actually arise such a situation, and that always looks very sketchy already up front, right?
Yeah.
When people will start doing that. I'm not saying, of course, you can play what's it called, Arvin and Irida and whatever, and then you can search it. Sure, fine, no problem. That actually makes perfect sense. We can just talk Palkia days. That happened a lot, right? Yeah. Question was 1 VIP, 4 VIP, or none, right? All these things. I remember I joined in a participation in that discussion. But back on track, because I love just to talk about everything. But point here, if you just pile out here like this, even if you shuffle probably afterwards with Mash Riffle and you say, oh, but that I do that afterwards anyway, then at best you just wasted time by piling in the first place. So that's not what you want to do. I think that's the easiest way I can explain it here.
Okay, so the lack of interaction with the cards and knowing exactly where cards are initially means you need to go ahead and mash your deck 8 times afterwards anyways, because they need to have sufficient interaction with each other without you knowing where a card is. Because let's take this 6 pile that I think that's like the go-to one for most people is the 6 piles.
Exactly.
If you put the top card of your deck in the first pile in the top left, they usually go, left to right, top to bottom. Then you know that the top card of the deck or card 1 is the 10th card down in the first stack. So then if you make that the bottom stack, the top card of your deck is now the bottom card of your deck. You know exactly where it is, right?
And then, of course, yes, the rules. And then you can always come and protect yourself and saying, yeah, but my opponent can shuffle my deck or cut my deck or whatever. But the point is, you're supposed to present a random deck in the first place.
Yeah.
That's another point here, right? Because you're protecting yourself by saying, oh, but it's my opponent's job. Then you're basically saying it's my opponent's job to make sure that I'm not cheating. What? Yeah. That's all. What? That's a little weird.
That always comes up whenever we see someone who is like allegedly stacking or whatever it might be. People's response is always, this is why you always shuffle your opponent's deck, or you can't shuffle your opponent's deck. And yeah, we know. Yeah, everyone knows that you can and should sometimes shuffle your opponent's deck. As far as being time efficient goes, it's usually not the most efficient way to do it. But the point is, in the rules, you're supposed to present your opponent with a sufficiently random deck before they go to cut, tap, or shuffle it themselves, right?
Exactly. Oh, spot on. You know the rules very well on this one, because this is a standard one all top players should definitely know by heart, or any player should just know by heart. But we're all here to learn, you know. That's also why we're having this discussion today, I think.
So pile shuffling, pile counting, good for counting your deck, but because but I guess I'll ask you this question. I feel like I already know the answer to this one. But if you pile shuffle your deck and then mash it 8 times, or just mash it 8 times, it has the exact same chance of being in the exact same order afterwards. Yes?
Yeah, because the first thing was not a shuffle, that was a counting. So,
yes. Okay,
so pile counting.
All right. Well, I think that covers all of the questions I had for you. Was there anything else that you wanted to go over and think that the people out there should know about?
These questions, I always know they come, but I always blank mine when that happens. I like to yip yap when I just get questions, right? Like you did here, but sometimes just when you ask these, I don't know. In any case, given the time and everything here, I hope I'll also see everybody in Japan, right? Because that's next up on the schedule, right? NAIC just finished.
Yeah.
And now it's Japan time. I am hyped. For the rest, I'll be there as staff this year. It's the first time I ever applied for staff, and I fortunately got in, so very happy about that. So, yeah, it's I'm excited, like a little kid, to go to Japan. That's going to be amazing. guess I'll see you there as well, Azul.
Yeah, I'll be there. So then the last thing I want to wrap this up with that is, for anyone maybe going to Japan and playing in Japan, I always like to give at least what I think is optimal to do, or whenever I watch a video on how to do something or what to do about something, I always like it when people give prescriptions for something. So
that's a good idea.
You had to give a prescription for what you would like to see Pokemon players do in general, on average, as far as shuffling goes. Not an exact number to work around, but at the beginning of matches, between games and during matches, what would you say are good practices to employ in their gameplay?
Number 1, pile counting is only reserved for counting your deck prior to game 1. That's what I would say. Of course, there are those off scenarios you described, but they're so rare that, of course, if you get somebody with the same deck and same 60, whatever, you figure it out when you get there.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no. Pile counting is reserved for prior to game 1, I would say. And in terms of you can riffle, mash, and mix and mash, that's all good. That's all fine. A number for that. Typically, everybody goes into 7, and that I would say is partially correct. But if you're setting up for game 1, you can increase the number to 9 or 10, I would say. Simply because, well, if we go strictly speaking for the formula, it makes more sense. And of course, as the game progresses, even with the first search you make, you already have a lot of cards out of the deck, right? Because you drew 7, you drew 8 for your turn, you put 6 away, that's 14 cards that's gone already from the stack, so you're down at 46. And then we're back at, like, say, the standard 7 at that moment, I think. And then as the game progresses, you go down to, say, a lower bound of, well, 4 or something. But then you're really low in the deck. And also, time. When you go to 4, what are you doing, 4 or 5? It's all fine, because at that point, it's going to not take a lot of time anyway. So In short, mash, riffle, mix and mash, whatever you want to do in the beginning for 8, 9, 10 times, it's all fine. As we go along for the first search and forward, you start at 7 and you move your way down to say 4. It's just my guess, right? And pile counting, please only do it setting up for game 1 to count your deck. That's it.
All right, sounds good. It was good to talk to you, Steffen. Where can the people find you? I know you're on YouTube, so go ahead and plug that, and your Twitter, so people can get more from you if they want in the future.
Indeed, if they like to do some Pokemath or just see teaching and whatever, if they're not afraid of learning something, perhaps Steffen's Classroom is the place to be. I just upload random stuff that comes to mind once in a while about Pokemon and math topics. I'm on Twitter as well. And yeah, I think that's it. Otherwise, maybe I find people in my classroom. That would be fun.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining me, Steffen, and thank you for having this talk with me. I hope a lot of people out there learned something about randomness, about RNG, and how to apply it to the Pokemon TCG. I'll catch y'all in my next video. Peace.
Bye.